Well, hello everybody. My name is Pablo Raya, and my lecture will be about my creative processes under the influence of Julio Estrada and Ilya Prigogine. And of course, many thanks for allowing me to be with you sharing some of my ideas. Okay. In the year 2004, approximately, I had the good fortune to become acquainted with some of the music and theoretical work of Julio Estrada. But at the same time, I also began to get acquainted with the writings of Ilya Prigogine, a chemist physicist who made important contributions to non-equilibrium thermodynamics. So the work of both of them was a fundamental influence to develop my creative work. Now I will try to explain in a summarized way some essential concepts and ideas of the musical and scientific approach of Julio Estrada and Ilya Prigogine, respectively. I will also show how they are related. Okay, let's start with Prigogine. Prigogine starts from a distinction between dynamics, that is the physics of Newton, and this kind of physics only studies the forces involved in motion. So there is no modification in the intrinsic constitution of bodies. And this kind of physics analyzes deterministic, stable, periodic, and reversible systems. So we're in the kingdom of linearity, and the image of nature is really simple. The thermodynamics, mainly Prigogine, this kind of physics studies the motion on the basis of heat. The immanent condition of bodies is thereby modified. Hence, the systems analyzed tend to be unstable, irreversible, and non-deterministic. So we are in the kingdom of non-linearity, and the image of nature is really complex. However, Prigogine's research on non-equilibrium thermodynamics can be summarized under one fundamental concept, that is dissipative structures. But what are these kind of structures? Okay, Prigogine defines them as follows. There is a quotation, I won't read it because we don't have too much time, but if we observe carefully within the notion of dissipative structures, other concepts linked to physics and mathematics are included. For example, instability or non-equilibrium, chaos, turbulence, spatiotemporal scales, nonlinearity. All these conceptualizations are linked in one way or another to the notion of complex systems. So a complex system is one that is related to any or all and many also many others of the concepts that I mentioned. So complex systems are non-linear dynamic systems with the multiple components and spatiotemporal scales that give rise to unstable, turbulent, or chaotic behaviors or processes. And equally important, dissipative structures or complex systems enable the birth or emergence of novel structures from chaos or disorder. I will now address the Estradian approach, and it will be divided into two parts. First, the two levels, and the second, the macro timbre. Okay, the two levels. Subjective level. Musical creation, from Estrada's point of view, is the result of the imaginative process that an individual deploys. This is the imaginary. This means that the composer will associate or link the sound through imagination, and a work linked to metaphor and analogy to multiple issues, such as, for example, the different states of matter. Nevertheless, the matter with which Estrada associates or links the sound to make his music is one whose behavior or dynamic movement is really irregular and capricious. But not only this, it must also be added that in this acoustic musical matter is treated with a high degree of resolution or refinement. Let's see the objective level. Of course, what the composer has imagined of sound has to be conceptualized and formalized in some way. This requires the development of specific musical knowledge and technique. In this sense, it can be stated that Estrada developed a technique and logic and a knowledge that is compatible with what he explored in his own imaginary. Here I'm talking about the notion of macro timbre. But what is the macro timbre? Estrada offers a very precise definition of this concept, but it can be summarized as follows. It is a way of constructing sound, that is, a way of giving a structural organization to acoustic matter and therefore to music. Let's see what is the macro timbre. So, as I already pointed out before, the macro timbre is a way of conceptualizing and giving a structural organization to sound. So with this in mind, we can consider the following. Since a conceptual perspective, the macro timbre understands that there is an acoustic matter whose dynamic behavior is very regular and intricate. For example, very similar to unstable or turbulent fluids. Structurally speaking, the notion of macro timbre understands that acoustic matter is made up of a large number of components. We are talking here about the stratified musical notation, which in addition, it can be treated, those components can be treated with different degrees of refinement or resolution. So we're talking about the scales. We talked about this a few moments ago, but here there is a quotation of Estrada, and this quotation it is a metaphor and an analogy that intends to explain what is the macro timbre, and with this in mind, with this explanation about the macro timbre, and with this metaphor analogy that explains what is the macro timbre, we can transfer this to the field of music. So a word can be understood as a system of multiple components, that is parameters that have very regular dynamic movements. Furthermore, the level of detail, the scales with which each component parameter is treated also is very important. Also, the assemblage of all these components or parameters will produce a sound resultant, that is a timbre, so a macro timbre. I will show you a graphic. This is a graphic that belongs to Julio. Below you have the stratified notation, and above you have the different parameters that are moving in time. Okay, Estrada and Prigogine. Here I will try to explain how they are related. As can be seen, there are many common elements between Julio Estrada and Ilya Prigogine. Estrada conceives a musical work as an assemblage of parameters that unfold and move in time in an irregular way. The product of this assemblage is a very complex timbre, that is, a macro timbre. Prigogine's dissipative structures refer to systems made up of multiple components that acquire very complex dynamic behaviors. But the theoretical scaffolding to describe and explain these systems is linked to the notion of chaos, nonlinearity, turbulence, stability, etc. So with this in mind, one might think that Estrada and Prigogine are talking about the same thing. That is, both have to deal with dynamic entities made up of multiple components with a very complex behavior. Estrada does it in musical terms. He seeks to create such entities. Prigogine does it in scientific terms. He seeks to understand such entities. So, in conclusion, Estrada and Prigogine have different purposes and develop different cognitive mechanisms. But this does not mean that there are no similar factors and interests between the work of them. Okay, now I will try to explain my creative processes under the influence of Julio and Ilya Prigogine. Okay, my starting point. The similarity between Estrada's and Prigogine's proposal led me to the following conclusion. What I must achieve in the area of musical creation is the realization of works that are understood as nonlinear dynamic systems outside of equilibrium with different scales. But as I am neither a physicist nor a mathematician, I had to resort to other kinds of reasoning or procedures that dispense with technical mathematical language. That language outside of mathematics was that of metaphor and analogy. So in synthesis, if I say that I had to resort to the metaphorical or the analogical, then I'm saying that the works I want to achieve should be understood as metaphors or analogies with the notion of complex systems. However, this does not mean that my works or those of Julio are complex systems in the same sense of the exact sciences. Some preliminary clarifications on the methodology. Okay, as I explained above, my works and also Estrada's can be understood as metaphor analogies with the notion of complex systems. This means that in my works you will observe unstable or turbulent behaviors, signs of nonlinearity, hints of chaos, scalar work, etc. Okay, let's see the methodology. First, I will explain some concepts, not all related to complex systems in the field of exact sciences. Then I will point out how these concepts are embodied in the musical works through the musical notation. Okay, let's start with the metaphor analogy with the notion of complex systems. And first, we must understand which is the concept of system or dynamic system. For the sciences, okay, systems are understood as a structure made up of a set of elements that interact with each other. There can be also subsets. If this is done as time progresses, then the system is understood as a dynamic system, and the system changes over time. A musical work can also be considered as a structure consisting of a set of elements, the parameters, that are interacting with each other over the time. For that reason, a musical work can perfectly be understood as a dynamic system. Okay, now let's see the concept of nonlinear interactions. Nonlinear interaction means between the multiple components or elements of the system, there are constant relationships of disturbance, complementation, competition, or interference. However, the effects of these relationships are not proportional. This is what the exact sciences says about the nonlinear interactions. Let's see in musical works. Between the different components or elements of the work, the parameters, there are also nonlinear interactions. To explain this phenomenon of nonlinearity in music, I will give an example of a piece for bass flute by myself. And we must understand the following. The structure of this piece has the following components or parameters. Those are the components or the parameters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. As we can see, or we all see in a moment, the notation is layered. And this entails nonlinear dynamic interaction between the parameters. For example, if temperature moves, this will modify the intensities and the pitch, and of course, the rest of the parameters. Therefore, the movement or modification of any of the parameters will have immediate repercussions on the rest of the parameters, that is, on the totality of the work or the system. Besides, this assemblage of parameters with a nonlinear behavior will give a complex timbre resultant, that is, a macro timbre, or a complex dynamical timbre structure. Here we have the piece for bass flute. The notation is layered. You have the different parameters, and the graphic below shows how are moving those parameters and how they are interacting between each others. And of course, there are nonlinear interactions. Okay, let's see the concept of scale. For the sciences, scales can refer to two issues: the degree or level of resolution with which the system is observed or analyzed, the distance with which we observe the system, and that degree or level of resolution is given in space or time. So the scales could then be as follows: the microscopic, the level of the very small in space or the very brief in time. This is the microscopic, and this can be related to quantum physics. The mesoscopic, the level of the medium in space and time. It can be referred to classical Newtonian physics. And the macroscopic, the level of the very large in space or the very long in time. And this can be linked to relativistic physics. Okay, let's see how this works on musical works. Regarding music, scale has to do with the degree of refinement or resolution with which the different parameters are treated. For example, in the parameter of pitches, we have two refinement options. Equal temperament is a coarse or average refinement. We are talking about the mesoscopic scale. And the microtones imply greater refinement, for example, the microscopic scale. So this scalar logic is susceptible to be applied to any parameter. Also, each parameter has different velocities. That means the existence of different time scales. In summary, with regard to scales in music, I propose the following classification. For spatial scales, the distance with which we work the system or the music, we have the medium or mesoscopic scale, the coarse or average resolution level of the parameter, and the micro or microscopic scale, the higher level of resolution or refinement of the parameter. For temporal scales, we have three levels: the tempo of the work, the duration time of the parameter itself, and the duration time of the parameter within a specific scale, medium or micro. Here we have an example. Each parameter is moving on or micro or media scale. Each parameter is treated with different levels of resolution. And okay, let's see the concept of instability or turbulence. Okay, for the science, if the system is perturbed but remains in its orbit, then it is stable. In contrast, if the system is perturbed and is taken out of its orbit, then it is unstable. Furthermore, this idea of stability or instability is also relevant in the area of fluid mechanics. So according to fluid mechanics, there are three kinds of flows. The laminar, when the flow line trajectories of each particle flow slowly as a sheet. Because of this, the particle trajectories do not disturb each other. The unstable or transitional. If the trajectories of the flow lines of each particle increase in velocity, they will start to disturb each other and the flow will become irregular and unstable. The turbulent, if the trajectories of the flow lines acquire a lot of speed and start to constantly interrupt each other, this will generate very irregular behavior and patterns. In this case, there will be turbulence and the flow will have many degrees of freedom in its movement. When we talk about turbulence, also we must talk about chaos, nonlinearity, diffusivity, etc. This graphic shows the first, the laminar flow, the second, the transitional or unstable flow, and the third, the turbulent flow. Let's see this in music. If we accept that each parameter of the work is a particle with a flow line that has a trajectory and a specific dynamic behavior, then this means that the parameters can be understood as a laminar, unstable, or turbulent flows. Let's see a parameter as laminar flow. If the parameter possesses little freedom in its motion and remains stable, this means that its behavior is linked to laminar flow. If the parameter acquires greater speed and freedom in its movement, in this case, we could be talking about instability or turbulence. I will show this with two musical examples. The first, a piece with stable or laminar behavior of the parameters. And the second, a piece with unstable or transitional behavior of the parameters. Let's see. Here, the parameters are always stable and remains quiet. And here a piece for violin. The trajectories of the parameters acquires irregular movement. So we can say that perhaps we have unstable behaviors. Okay, let's see the concept of chaos. There are different definitions of chaos. From a strictly mathematical point of view, chaos is understood as a deterministic system with a high sensitivity to in the initial conditions, and due to the non-linearities between the components of the system, aperiodic structures and patterns are generated. This is the reason why it is impossible to predict the future of the system. It is also necessary to point out that within the notion of chaos, other concepts such as attractors, fractals, etc. are also included. Of course, in classical physics, the physics of Newton, the analysis of stable systems with periodic and therefore non-chaotic structures prevail. Let's see how chaos works on musical works. In his well-known article entitled Metamorphosis of Musical Form, Ligeti explained that in tonal music, periodic configuration or structures always predominated. It was not until the second half of the 20th century that composers began to experiment with aperiodic structures. So, if we compare the structures or configurations of the works that we saw before with the structures or configuration of tonal works, we can conclude that tonality is certainly linked to periodicity, whilst my works, or also Estrada's works, or many other composers of the 20th century, tend to be aperiodic. Here we have two examples of tonal music, Wagner and Beethoven. As we can see, they have very periodic patterns. Okay, Julio Estrada and Ilya Prigogine were very relevant to the development of my own creative work. This is because they both offer a perspective and an analysis of reality that is complex. Estrada does it in reference to music, Prigogine in reference to the exact sciences. Therefore, if one intends to transfer the behavior and complex properties of some phenomena of nature to the field of music, it seems very pertinent to take the research of both as a starting point. Okay, that's all. Many thanks for listening to me. And